I'm really excited today to have this panel join us to talk about self-care. And you know, they were picked, they were hand-selected because I know of them, and I know not only about what they talk about, but how they also choose to live their lives in some ways, right? I'm not watching their whole lives, but I know that they practice what they preach, and so they were nice enough to come and talk about this with you guys and share some of their experiences. So I'm Dr. Jessica Moeller. I'm at the Midshipman Development Center, and you know, we have these life skills about once a month, and so I'm so glad that you could be with us today. When wanting to think about introducing this topic, you know, I got on the internet, right, and started thinking about, so what does Google say about self-care? Because it seems that often, you know, Google can be a pretty big expert at this. And so I found actually some really wonderful stories of self-care. One analogy in particular that I thought just made sense, it came from a writer in The Atlantic, and she talked about, so I'm going to look at my notes here a little bit, but you know, she talked about, you know, if you're walking outside in a thunderstorm without an umbrella, and you kind of walk into this cafe or kind of spot where there's armchairs that are really comfortable looking and maybe flowers up and pictures around the room with all kinds of nice quotes that say things like, be kind to yourself, right, and you are enough. That can kind of be jarring, walking from this thunderstorm kind of atmosphere into this atmosphere where you feel kind of cared for and comfortable. The scenery might be nice, right? It might be kind of a nice place to look around, but it can kind of shock you. And it's interesting, like when you're in the storm, you may have not realized actually how soaked and wet you were becoming, but as you go into this kind of place where now it's dry and comfortable, you realize you're completely soaked, right? You've really kind of gotten used to being out in the rain, and you didn't even necessarily notice the thunderstorm was happening. And I think sometimes that is how self-care can be. We're not even necessarily aware that we need it until we get somewhere nice where it feels better. And how do we transition that? So self-care is any intentional act that you do to take care of a physical, mental, emotional state. Right? Good self-care is challenging, and I think can be especially challenging for midshipmen. And I'm not so sure that's going to change when you move to the fleet. It can just be challenging. It can just be overwhelming to consider doing something else, like doing something new to make myself feel better when I'm already kind of overwhelmed a bit, or kind of just making it. And so I'm hoping our presenters, right, which I know that they can do, will begin to talk about just ideas of how to do this. You know, sometimes when we're really stressed, it can be really hard to understand how that's even affecting us, and that we have to go back to our baseline needs. How many of you have heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Oh, lots of hands, right? That's a really important theory, and when we start talking about self-care, sometimes it's simply, as you guys are eating in this room, like getting food, right? Sometimes it's as simple as hydrating. Sometimes it's as simple as getting some sleep. Like, that's the baseline. And often you can go after these kind of higher order needs, but if that base isn't taken care of, it's hard to get even farther up in that process. Another quote I'll read. So this is how this person saw this. So to me, it was a way to build resistance to kind of crap going on, to disappointment and depression, to ward off uncertainty. But I've learned along the way that this is impossible. If you're never going to be consistently happy and you can't prevent sadness or life from running its course. Self-care is a way to at least strengthen yourself, find some inner core so that you're ready when life comes at you. So we're not here to change life. We're here to help you cope, right? Back to that first kind of analogy I was talking about. You know, some of this is just realizing, like, getting an umbrella so you can walk back out into the thunderstorm and not quite get as wet. So like when you eventually got to wade back into it, are you a little more prepared for that wading back into it, even though the thunderstorm is still happening? Our first presenter, is Lieutenant Commander Jack Ryan, and he'll be telling a bit of his story.
Well, good afternoon. I am Lieutenant Commander Jack Ryan. I appreciate you guys coming out here today, and I really appreciate Dr. Moeller offering myself and my other two panelists the opportunity to talk to you about self-care. So anyone I've ever had in class, which I look out into the audience and I recognize some of your faces, you know that when I say we're going to keep this to about 5 minutes, it's really going to be like 8 or 9 because I can't help myself but keep talking. So, a little history. I was a 99 graduate from this fine institution, 21st Company, right? That's how we all identify ourselves. Nice, there you are. I went EOD out of here. Back then, we actually had to do surface warfare tours. So I spent some time at grad school, went down to dive school, went out to Japan, did a SWO tour, and then got to go back to EOD school and actually do the fun stuff. A couple deployments, 2 to Iraq, back doing some staff stuff, and then back to the desert again with an operations billet at that point. And eventually, you work your way up in your career, you put on different rank, and you find yourself in a administrative or management position. I was the XO of Mobile Diving Salvage Unit 1 out in Hawaii. And the reason I kind of come to the trajectory of my career there is because I was 34, I think. I was about 33, 34 years old. I had 3 boys. I was married, and I had a really good life. I looked back on my career. I was about 9 or 10 years in the Navy at that point, and in all ways of looking at it, I was successful. I was, early select for lieutenant commander, early select for XO, kind of riding that wave of being in the right place at the right time, but also, doing well, doing what they say, what they teach you to do here. But the disappointing part to me was I didn't feel that sense of success. I felt like at any stage in the game, the curtain was going to get pulled back. They were going to find out that I didn't know what I was doing, that I wasn't as good as they said I was, that I wasn't as smart as they said I was, and that I was going to fail. And all it was going to take was one misstep, one little mistake, or being in the wrong place at the wrong time. And I felt like what researchers now call and are starting to really dig into is this feeling of being an imposter, that imposter syndrome. And I didn't like it. I didn't know why I felt that way. And I just could not get past constantly thinking it's all going to come to an end. And I didn't enjoy it. I was not having fun, right? Like, how can you not have fun working at an expeditionary diving unit in Hawaii, right? It's beautiful. It is the pinnacle of where you want to be. And I didn't like it. And that didn't make any sense to me. And so I asked for help. I had a couple good mentors and a couple good friends. And, of course, some were as simple as shut up, get over it, right? Like, suck it up. Like, what's your problem? Why are you complaining? And that's normal to a sense where you're in a community or you're in a place with a lot of alpha types of personalities. But I had one friend who, he didn't offer me any advice and he didn't offer me any mentorship, and he just gave me a book. And it was this book by Jon Kabat-Zinn called Wherever You Go, There You Are. And the line that I took from that book is in the title, Wherever You Go, There You Are, is that I was always waiting. I was always telling myself the story of when I get to this job, I'll be happy. When I get through this, I'll be happy. When I climb Herndon, I'll be happy. When I graduate from the Naval Academy, I'll be happy. When I get, right? Like, every time I would delay that gratification, I would get to where I was, and guess what? I was still there. Like, it was still me there, and I wasn't happy because I was waiting for someone else to give it to me. I was waiting for that feeling of making it. Well, guess what? It doesn't come, like, it's not there. Like, it's not going to show up all of a sudden when you show up there because you're still there. So what's the secret? Like, what's the practice? How do you fix that? And it's funny, like, I'm catching you caught my eye. You breathe, right? I want everyone to go ahead, just take a breath and let it out. Guess what? You're here. Like, this is it. This is as good as it gets. Being able to breathe, being able to be present, and being able to experience this moment right now. And I had never had somebody say that clearly, that succinctly to me and put it in a practice, a mindfulness, meditation, daily sitting practice. And when we say those words, when you say meditation, you think orange robes, sitting on some cushion somewhere, touching my fingers and ahming something. It can be, and it can be as simple as just paying attention to your breath, paying attention to the words that you say, paying attention to where you are, what you're doing, who you're with. But it's in the attention, the actual paying attention. That was a practice that I had never done, that I didn't even know was something you could practice. And within about 6 months of dedicating 5 to 10 minutes a day in the morning, the first thing I was doing that day, and just sitting and realizing that my brain never stops moving. My brain never stops thinking. But that's all right. Because like a puppy, right? Like a puppy goes off and, that bone, that bone, that bone. What do? You don't, and I hope you don't kick the puppy, right? It's not the puppy's fault. It doesn't know. And so you gently redirect it and bring it back, right? No. We're doing this right now. We're just doing this one thing. And you just bring it back. And that attention, that practice was something that in 2010, I started doing deliberately, conscientiously. That was my umbrella. And I love that metaphor that Dr. Moeller introduced. That was my umbrella for the times when things didn't go so well. And those moments when, guess what? I found myself in the wrong place at the wrong time. And when it was over, nobody called me an imposter. I failed. I didn't do as great as I thought I was going to do. And people found out that, maybe I wasn't as smart as I thought I was. But those were just thoughts. Those were just made up realities, made up futures that I thought were going to be problematic. But the daily practice of sitting, paying attention, being present, and accepting the moment for the moment actually opened the door for me to realize that there's a lot of good stuff that happens every day, whether you're paying attention to it or not. And you get to choose to pay attention to it. And so I made that choice, and that's the self-care practice that I still do today. I sit sometimes 5 minutes, sometimes 10, sometimes 20, and I'm a CrossFit nerd. Like, I like to work out and I like to coach people. So I got a coach. I found somebody to help me give a practice. And I would do it, and they would check in with me, and she would say, "Are you doing it?" And I'd say, "No," and "Why not?" And because I'm not a good client. And she's like, "Why are you saying you're not a good client? Like, what does that mean?" And challenging those words, challenging that language that you use, but paying attention to it. And that was the practice that I did then, have done since, and I offer to you that it is as simple as just sitting and paying attention to your breath. So if you're interested, if you want to, we'll do it for like a minute. I think maybe I have 1 minute. All right. So go ahead. I want everyone to sit up nice and tall. Close your eyes. And we're just going to take 3 breaths. All right? Breathe in through your nose. And breathe out. And back in. Feeling where that breath comes in. And back out. And one more breath. Back out. And go ahead and open your eyes. How many people found their mind wandering in those 30 seconds? Right? There you go. There's your mindfulness for today. Well done. You brought yourself back, but it's that simple. And it's that easy. And it can be a minute. It can be 10 minutes. It can be 30 minutes. But you guys do have the time, and I offer to you it's worth it. It's definitely worth it. So there you go. That's my story.
I am not a graduate of Naval Academy. I have a lot of respect for those who are and those who choose to come here. But I went through ROTC right down the road at George Washington University. I commissioned in May of 2001. While I was in school, I was an engineering major, and I played 2 varsity sports. I ran cross-country track and rode crew. I commissioned in May 2001, and I had my first flight in flight school on September 11th, 9/11. My best friend, a teammate from college, her dad was killed in the Twin Towers. So I had a significant stress event during flight school. Continued through, ended up selecting jets and went to Kingsville, Texas for flight training, and then ultimately out to Lemoore, California, where I was with VFA 41 as a strike fighter pilot flying the F-18. I did 2 deployments on the USS Nimitz in support of troops on the ground in Iraq and Afghanistan. And then I did a deployment, boots on ground, on a provincial reconstruction team in Afghanistan. While I was there, my CO was a Navy SEAL, my senior enlisted was a Navy SEAL, our OPSO was an Army Helo guy, and we went out and worked with a lot of interagency teams, doing some pretty dynamic stuff, trying to create some stability operations and stability in the region. I don't know how successful we were, but we saw a lot of things, and I came back happy to have all my bits and pieces. And my good deal payback for that arduous tour was back at an ROTC unit instructing. I loved it. They thought I was okay at it, and so that's how I was offered the position here, teaching. And I'm in the leadership and ethics department, teaching NL 310 right now, and really enjoying it. So I've had a pretty interesting career, deployments in the air, deployments on the ground, and everything in between. Through all of it, even the times of stress, I have always maintained a daily habit of 8 hours minimum of sleep a day. So everybody's rolling their eyes and saying, you know, liar. Okay, I am a liar. For 36 years, I maintained a habit of daily 8 hours of sleep, minimum. Usually it's about 8.5, 9 hours. And then last year I had a baby. So for the past year, and you could probably hear my voice is a little raspy. He was up twice last night. This is the only time in my life that I've really felt sleep deprivation, and it sucks. It's terrible. But my husband and I are getting into a routine now where we alternate, and so one of us will stay up one night, and then the other will stay up. So last night was my night. I was on duty at the house. So how did I manage to, as an engineering major playing 2 varsity sports, or going through flight school, going through the jet training pipeline, or going on these deployments, how did I manage to maintain 8 hours of sleep? Part of it was a good solid choice in service selection. So if you go aviation, we have something called crew rest, right, where they actually mandate a certain amount of rest for aviators, because they say if you're operating this highly technical, very expensive piece of equipment, we want you to be well rested, right? We don't want you to make little mistakes or mistakes that are because of a fatigue situation, and risk lives, limbs, or an $80 million aircraft. I used to come back to the ship and have dinner with the SWOs, right? And their culture it's almost like they brag about how little sleep they got. They were on watch, and they were doing this, they were doing that, and I got 3 hours of sleep day after day after day. And I would say, well, it's about that time, right? Crew rest. And I never understood that. I never understood why that was something that they felt this pride in, because really it made me a little nervous that they were driving the ship, right? That I was about to go sleep in. So sleep, I cannot underscore it enough. And again, I see some eyes rolling, and you don't understand what it's like to be here at the Academy. I didn't go here, but I know that if you make it a priority, right, if you make the time, you can make it happen. And once you make it a habit, right, then you get used to saying no. You get used to just rearranging your life. We don't have a TV in our house, so that's minutes or hours a day that I'm not sucked into something. I'm very easily sucked in. when I'm in a waiting room. I was at medical the other day and they had HGTV, right? The shows where they renovate a house, right? And I almost didn't, they called my name and I said, wait, I have to see what they did to this kitchen, right? I have to stay for the reveal. And the nurse said, you know, it's your appointment time is right now. And I said, okay, well, maybe I can Google this, you know, when I get back. And as I was walking back, I said, man, this is why I don't have a TV, right? Because if I watched 5 minutes, I would watch an hour just to see what happens at the end. And it's not even that exciting. I mean, we're renovating a bathroom or something. So if you make it a priority, it can happen. So I actually, as I was thinking about preparing for this, I had 3 things that I was going to talk about, and the other 2, I hesitated when I saw the camera up there, but I'm going to go ahead and talk about them. So the first one is sleep, and that's pretty mundane, right? And the other 2 are sex and alcohol. And you know, there's a little shock value there, get your attention. But I'm going to talk about them, right? Because we're all adults. Is anybody not 18 in here? Okay. So I made a decision very early on, right, when I was in high school, to become sexually active and to incorporate alcohol into my social routine. But I had role models and I had people in my life who modeled a behavior of healthy intimacy and healthy consumption of alcohol. So people who could have a glass of wine at dinner and enjoy it in a social situation without going overboard. People who could enter a relationship, have safe sex, use protection, find a partner who was going to treat them with respect, right, and enjoy sex for pleasure rather than some sort of